It's a celebration of America's freedom. Welcome to the Mark Scaringi Show. The Mark Scaringi Show is your place for a weekly discussion on making America great again. The important political and legal issues of the day, a celebration of the Constitution, and traditional American values. Mark is a practicing attorney, a former senatorial candidate, a Donald J. Trump-endorsed delegate, and a defender of the Constitution. His goal? To put America first. And now, celebrating America's freedoms, here's attorney Mark Scaringi.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Mark Scaringi Show. This is your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. This is the place where we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. And welcome to my listeners on WHP 580 and iHeartRadio, and also those on the Harrisburg 100 Facebook Live and the various Facebook Live programs that we have running right now. Feel free to comment live or call in 717-540-0580. That's 717-540-0580, and let me know your thoughts on the important political and legal issues of the day. If you'd like to listen to prior podcasts of the show, read my biweekly columns on Penn Live, or take a look at some great merchandise we have, you can look at the markscaringishow.com website, and you can subscribe to our show on YouTube and follow me on Twitter or Facebook. Well, earlier this week, the Democratic Party sponsored two presidential debates back-to-back. Both debates occurred in the Motor City, Detroit, Michigan. They divided the field in half, 10 candidates the first day and 10 others the second day. And leading candidates Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont and Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts were on day one, and former Vice President Joe Biden and California Senator Kamala Harris were on day two, among all of the other candidates who qualified for that debate. And the Democratic candidates, as a result of their two-day debate performance, are taking some heat from the left wing of their party. Several of the candidates attacked former President Barack Obama's policies, particularly his immigration policy, and also those candidates who are now advocating for Medicare for all are essentially admitting that Obamacare, the signature HealthCare health insurance issue for the Obama administration, is a failure. Otherwise, there would be no need for the Democrats to be sponsoring Medicare for all. But it was Obama's immigration policies that really generated a lot of ire by Democratic presidential candidates. And as you recall, Obama presided over a significant number of deportations. He deported upwards of 3 million desperate, poor, impoverished Mexicans and Central Americans. Former President Barack Obama apparently unable to feel sympathy or empathy for the impoverished Central Americans who were fleeing persecution in their homelands, fleeing poverty and joblessness and violence, and fleeing gang control of their towns and schools. They came to America, and Obama put them in cages and sent them back. It's a terrible indictment of the Obama administration's immigration policy by the left wing of the Democratic Party, and several Democratic presidential candidates really hit Joe Biden hard. Biden, of course, was complicit in the Obama policy of deportation of millions of Central Americans. Cory Booker, the senator from New Jersey, among others, really took some shots at the front-runner, former Vice President Joe Biden. And also left-wing advocacy groups that are very busy across the country getting their supporters together to advocate for one candidate over the other are clearly staking their ground here and attacking former Vice President Joe Biden for working with Obama hand in hand to conduct all of those horrible and terrible deportations that the Obama administration carried out. Joe Enriquez Henry, Vice President of the Midwestern region of the League of United Latin American Citizens, he said Biden needs to be accountable. Biden needs to make it clear, if he wants to be president, that he has compassion and understanding, and he needs to ask for forgiveness. Enriquez Henry, who he is mobilizing Latinos across the country, but also focusing on the Iowa caucuses. He called the Obama-Biden deportations, he called them the major deportations during the Obama presidency. He called them a terrible crime for Latinos. And Biden needs to do his penance. Whew, that's a stinging indictment of Joe Biden and Barack Obama and their criminal deportation policy, as articulated by the head of the League of United Latin American Citizens, Joe Enriquez Henry. Also, on Friday's broadcast of HBO's Real Time, host Bill Maher, the radical left-wing commentator, he criticized Democratic presidential candidates for their attacks on President Obama during their debates. He mocked the notion that Barack Obama, a person who is still hugely popular among Democrats, according to Bill Maher, is not woke enough. Of course, Maher is mocking those Democrats like Cory Booker and Julian Castro and others who attacked the Obama-Biden immigration policies and deportation policies. Bill Maher's not happy with that. And he suggested that these Democratic presidential candidates constantly attacking Obama's deportation policies are going to help President Trump win re-election. Bill Maher said the Democratic candidates went after the president hard, and he's talking about former President Barack Obama. Unfortunately, the president was Obama, the guy with the 97% approval rating among the Democrats. He is not woke enough now. That's Bill Maher characterizing the position of Barack Obama in the Democratic Party as not woke enough for the extreme left wing of the Democratic Party that has risen to the top in this Democratic presidential debate in the person of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. Probably are the two big, and you also have Cory Booker, who is in the top tier, and he is savagely criticized the Obama deportation and immigration policies. And you also had AFL-CIO President Richard Trumka. He blasted Democrats during a private meeting earlier in the week for their globalist free trade agenda. Now, we didn't hear too much about the free trade agenda of the Democratic Party, but remember, Vice President Joe Biden, as a United States Senator, voted for NAFTA. They all favored the Trans-Pacific Partnership, although Biden is now trying to put a little distance there from his former strong support because he knows that his support for TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, is going to hurt him among union workers, which is a big part of his base, of his coalition. Remember, Biden, the reason for the Biden prospect here, what Biden is selling Democrats is that he can get those blue-collar voters who flipped and went from traditionally voting for Democrats to vote for President Trump in 2016. Biden says he can get them back, but he's not going to get them back if he continues his liberal, progressive, free trade ideology. And there you have Richard Trumka, probably the most powerful union boss in the country, head of the AFL-CIO, really taking these Democratic presidential candidates to task for their support of TPP and the globalist free trade agenda. We'll talk more about these Democratic presidential debates when we return from this brief commercial break. You're listening to The Mark Scaringi Show.
Now, more of Mark Scaringi on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to the Mark Scaringi Show, your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. We're talking today about the Democratic presidential debates that occurred just a few days ago in Detroit, Michigan, and how several of the prominent Democratic presidential candidates really took shots at former President Barack Obama's policies, most importantly his immigration and deportation policy, where former Vice President worked with Obama and conducted 3 million deportations of all of those poor and innocent and deserving Central American migrants who were trying to get into our country to make themselves a better life and make their way in the land of the free and the land of opportunity for all. But Barack Obama and Joe Biden, they shut that door at the border and they deported millions of Central Americans. Terrible, horrible, at least according to the left wing of the Democratic Party. We heard from them during the debate, and President Trump actually took a little bit of pleasure in the hits that Barack Obama was taking. He had a rally in Cincinnati. I don't know if all of you watched that, but it was pretty good, as always. And Trump quipped Thursday night in Cincinnati that the Democrats spent more time attacking Barack Obama than they did attacking me. And Joe Biden is also getting some distance out of this. He said he stopped at a diner in Detroit the day after the debate, and he said, "I must tell you, I was a little surprised how much the incoming was about Barack." So, of course, you have Joe Biden talking about how the incoming was against Barack Obama, but really, Joe, it was against you because you were Barack Obama's vice president. But there is Joe Biden, who is going to wed himself to Barack Obama and tie himself as closely as possible to the former president, who is so popular among Democrats across the country. And that's really Joe Biden's calling card. Joe Biden is saying, "Hey, I'm Barack Obama 2.0," and he's hoping that will be enough to allow him to carry the day. We shall see. But what I wanted to talk about more about was the issue of health care. And of course, the health care issue is the most important issue for Democrats. And in all of the debates, we watched as Democrats spent a considerable amount of time debating health care and health insurance, which, by the way, are two different things that Democrats seem not to grasp or understand. But the opening debate with Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren as the leading contenders day one of the two-day debates, they spent about the first 20 minutes on health insurance. And there I was sitting in my den at home and watching that debate and wondering why it is that I'm listening to a lecture from Bernie Sanders on health insurance and health care. How is it possible that this man, Bernie Sanders, has any credibility on the issue of health insurance and health care? How is it possible that any Democrat has any credibility on this issue? It just seems so odd to me. Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, all of those Democrats on those stages over those 2 days were strong defenders and advocates for Obamacare, Barack Obama's signature legislative, quote, achievement, end quote, which was an absolute disaster. I mean, why would any American believe any Democrat on the issues of health insurance or health care? The gall to stand up on that stage before millions of Americans and lecture America on health care while their policy, their plan, Obamacare, has failed so demonstrably and so publicly, it's quite remarkable to me. So that was my initial observation of Democrats' debate. Here we go. For months now, Democrats are going to lecture us on health care when their plan has failed miserably and is failing to this day, and so many Americans are suffering as a result of the failure of Obamacare. Yet Democrats, they're going to lecture us and tell us how what else they're going to do to us. I mean, what's coming next is the question. And Bernie Sanders led the debate on health insurance. Bernie and Elizabeth Warren, they're pushing Medicare for all. So why are they talking about Medicare for all when they were staunch advocates for Obamacare? I thought Obamacare was going to fix the problem of the ever-escalating rise in the price of health insurance premiums and the ever-rising increase in out-of-pocket costs and deductibles. I thought Obamacare was going to solve that. And I thought Obamacare was going to ensure health insurance for all Americans. But not Bernie and Elizabeth Warren. They talk about something else. More health insurance reform we're going to get from the Democrats. Now they're touting Medicare for all. They tout Medicare as a great achievement of the Democratic Party. And they're arguing that because it has been so successful, Medicare that is, every American should be forced into Medicare at any age. Whether you're 18, 20, 30, 50, you're going to have to get into Medicare for all now. I mean, but the underlying claim that Medicare has been a great achievement is an absolute falsehood. And let's examine that claim a little bit further. Medicare operates today under a negative cash flow basis. So today, Medicare is in the red and hemorrhaging cash. The boards of trustees for Medicare, in its 2019 annual report, stated Medicare's hospital trust fund is expected to run out of money in 2026. That's less than 8 years from today. And remember, there's nothing in the Medicare trust fund but IOUs, but treasury bonds, really. That's what's in the Medicare trust fund. But yet, but we have to go by this bookkeeping charade that there's actual real money in the trust funds. There isn't. But if there were, we'd be dry in less than 8 years. And we're already running in the red on Medicare. And the Board of Trustees published its official assumptions that Medicare's looking out the next 75 years, its unfunded liabilities are at $37 trillion. And that estimate is likely to be very low. That's the trustees' own estimate. We're short $37 trillion in unfunded liabilities for Medicare. We're hemorrhaging cash. We're in the red now, and there's nothing in the Medicare trust fund. That's the achievement of Medicare. Medicare is a debt time bomb that just a few years from now is going to explode. So what do the Democrats propose? Let's put a couple 100 million more Americans into Medicare. That's their solution to the problem of the ever-escalating cost of health insurance. Now, a few years ago, the Congressional Budget Office released a report that compared what private insurance and Medicare fee-for-services pay for physician services. And they also compared what private payers, Medicare private pay and Medicare Advantage plans pay for hospitals. And the reports found that private insurers pay much more for physician services than Medicare, and Medicare Advantage pays hospitals nearly the same amount on average than Medicare fee-for-services, and much less than private payers. So Medicare is paying your doctor and your hospital a lot less than private health insurers are paying your doctor and your hospital. And that's because Medicare reimbursement rates to healthcare providers are determined by the United States government, not by the free market. So what do our government officials in Washington, D.C. do? They constantly undercut and underpay healthcare providers compared to private insurers. So one reason why private health insurance costs are always going up and always going up at substantially higher than the rate of inflation is because healthcare providers are charging private insurance and private pay patients more than they charge patients covered by Medicare, because Medicare is underpaying them. So they have to make up the difference. So we who purchase private insurance and also, of course, pay into Medicare involuntarily, we are absorbing the cost differential. That's one of the reasons why our health insurance premiums increase dramatically year in and year out. Because we are basically subsidizing the healthcare providers who are being underpaid by the government through its Medicare and Medicaid programs. And this is something that's just basic business and basic economics that the Democratic Party and the Democratic presidential candidates, they simply don't understand. They don't understand basic economics. They don't understand basic business practices. They've never run a business, and let alone run a health insurance company or a healthcare company that actually provides the healthcare. Yet their standard bearers, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, they come out on the stage and they tell us how they're going to fix the system that they fundamentally do not understand, that it is their policies and programs that are causing the significantly and the rising increase in costs and health insurance premiums. More about the Democratic presidential debate and their disastrous health care policy plans when we return from this brief commercial break. You're listening to The Mark Scaringi Show.
Now back to the Mark Scaringi Show on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to the Mark Scaringi Show, your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. We're talking today about the Democratic presidential debate that occurred in Detroit, Michigan just a few nights ago. We had 2 days of debates, 20 Democratic presidential candidates, and we're talking about how I was struck by how on day one we listened to Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and others lecture us on how they're going to fix the health insurance and health care systems in our country. Yet they were staunch advocates of Obamacare, and I thought Obamacare was supposed to fix all of that. And we're talking about how our Democratic presidential candidate friends really have no understanding of how health insurance works, how the health care market works, how business works, how economics work. And we're getting some good comments on Facebook Live. Todd Kiefer is reminding us of the importance of health savings accounts, a free market-based reform that brings us closer to direct pay, first-party pay for healthcare services, which is really where we need to be. And I remember when I was a younger man working in the United States Senate for Rick Santorum back in the mid-1990s, and that was one of Santorum's signature issues. We ran on it in 1994 in his campaign for the U.S. Senate. Back then, we called them medical savings accounts. And he won that race, and we went to the Senate, and I went with him. And that was one of the issues that I worked on when I was a little staffer there on Capitol Hill. And Todd Kiefer's right on the money. We need to get back to where we started in healthcare and get the patient, the purchaser of the healthcare, to be directly connected to the provider of the healthcare, and get back to insurance really just being there for catastrophic coverage. And I remember when I was a young boy listening to my grandparents talk about health insurance. And back in the olden days, they used to refer to it as major medical and hospitalization. And I remember my grandmother talking about that when talking about someone in the family getting a job. And the first question was, does the employer provide hospitalization? Does the employer provide major medical? And that's in the day when health insurance was used for catastrophic coverage, for severe illnesses, severe injuries that required stay in the hospital. And of course, that would be very expensive. So that is something you would insure against. But Democrats, after 20 or 30 years of screwing up our health insurance and health care systems, they don't view health care or health insurance as market-based. They view health care as a fundamental right that the American people, and in fact, according to Bernie Sanders and others, even our friendly Central American migrants, hundreds of millions, billions of people from the third world, according to Bernie Sanders and Democrats, they have a right to health care here in the United States. Of course, that's a total fraud, and that's totally incorrect. In America, we don't have the right to compel someone to provide a service to us at no charge. When you go to the doctor's office because you have a cold, you can't make that doctor, you can't compel him to service you. He has to agree to see you and to provide medical services to you. And you know what? He's going to need to be paid to do that. I'm sorry, but that's the way the world works. But our Democratic friends, that's not what they want. They want every American and a couple 100 million Central Americans to have a right to health care. And they're going to provide it by forcing health care providers to accept the low payments that the government's going to pay them. And then the government is not going to have enough money to pay for all of that care. They never do. They never have. And so they're going to tax the hell out of the American people to make up the difference. And that's really what Medicare for All is all about. And Bernie Sanders is the chief advocate of that. And yet he hails from the state of Vermont. Yet Vermont tried single payer, and they couldn't even get it off the tarmac, so to speak. Bernie's a socialist senator from Vermont. Back in 2015, Vermont tried Bernie's single-payer health insurance system, and it failed miserably. His then governor scrapped the plan after he concluded they would put in a 12% payroll tax on businesses, and then they would have sliding premiums up to about 10% of the individual's income. The governor declared, the liberal Democratic governor declared that was too much for the Vermont economy to bear. It would hurt the Vermont economy. That new income tax on Vermonters represented more than a 150% hike in the state's income tax rate. The cost for the program, the single-payer program in Vermont that failed miserably, was estimated to be $4.3 billion a year, which was nearly the size of the state's entire budget. And that's why it failed. Yet we have Bernie Sanders lecturing us on how he's going to fix our health care system. Governor Shumlin, who was the governor of Vermont at the time, he said the tax hikes needed to fund the Vermont's version of Medicare for All. He said, quote, in a word, enormous, end quote. The bottom line as we completed the financing and the modeling is that the risk of economic shock is too high to offer a plan I can reasonably support. The Shumlin administration of Vermont found that spending would balloon from $2 billion to $2.6 billion in just a couple of years. Yet the program would run deficits by 2020, requiring even more tax hikes. Now, and how about this? The liberal Washington Post just wrote an editorial blasting Senator Warren and Senator Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All plan. Now, this is the liberal Washington Post. It writes, proposals should meet a baseline degree of factual plausibility, a bar that, for example, the Medicare for All plan that Mr. Sanders and Ms. Warren favor does not clear. This is the liberal Washington Post saying that all plans and policies that politicians introduce have to have a baseline degree of factual plausibility, and the Sanders and Warren Medicare for All plan doesn't even reach the baseline degree of factual plausibility. The senators cannot deliver a system that provides far more benefits than other single-payer systems they claim as their model, while preserving the level of care and access that insured Americans currently enjoy. They should make the case for a government monopoly on health care if they want, but they should be honest about the trade-offs. That's the liberal Washington Post slamming Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren for basically lying about the cost of their single-payer Medicare for All health insurance plans. Now, let's open up the phone lines. We'll take some calls. I want to hear what you think about the Democratic presidential candidates and their health care and health insurance reform policies. We'll hear from Scott. You're on the Mark Scaringi Show. And how do you think the Democrats did on the issue of health care? Scott, you're on the Mark Scaringi Show. Can you hear me? Well, maybe there's no Scott. Maybe he can call back later. We'll figure out what happened there. But, or maybe there is a Scott. Is there?
Hello.
Hey,
Mark.
Scott. Yes, you're on the Mark Scaringi Show.
Sorry about that, Mark. Hey, your points are spot on with what as you're breaking down the health plans with Vermont. Great analogy. My comment as far as the Democratic debate, I did watch a little of this debate. I did not watch the first debate. I just was curious on your opinion. Does it look to you that Vice President Biden really has the energy to, there's just part of me that thinks he really don't want to be there.
Yeah, Scott, that's a great observation. Joe Biden absolutely does not have the energy or the desire or the motivation. He doesn't have the stamina, as President Trump would say. He doesn't want it enough, and he looks like he doesn't want to be there. He looks like he's just going through the motions, and that was evident by his false start in 2016. When for a couple of months, remember, he hemmed and hawed and went back and forth as to whether he was going to run then when Hillary Clinton was the front runner, and he made up some excuse about his family and why he couldn't do it. His family life has never stopped him from being in public office, from running for re-election. He just doesn't have the desire, and he obviously doesn't have the smarts. He doesn't have the chops. He will be demolished by President Donald Trump on the debate stage and on the campaign trail. It will be a disaster for him. He knows that, and that's why he doesn't want to be there. Scott, thanks for the call. I got to take a commercial break. You're listening to the Mark Scaringi Show. Stay tuned. We'll be back right after this.
Now back to the Mark Scaringi Show on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to the Mark Scaringi Show, your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. We're talking today about the Democratic presidential debate, 2 nights in Detroit, Michigan, earlier in the week. And we heard a lot from Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren about the Medicare for All health insurance or HealthCare. They combine the two. I don't think they understand there's a difference. Reform policy. And how ironic it is to me that Democratic presidential candidates or any Democratic candidates who were so strongly in favor of Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, have the gall to lecture the American people on how they're going to fix the problem that they play a big part in creating. Obamacare has been a disaster. It's demonstrably so. But yet now they're going to give us more. Joe Biden's going to give us the public option, a little more Obamacare from Joe Biden. Bernie and Elizabeth Warren are going all the way Medicare for all to force us all into a Medicare system that is absolutely bankrupt as it is. And isn't that ironic? And Bernie Sanders, coming from Vermont, that couldn't even get its single-payer plan off the ground because its own liberal Democratic governor said it would be disastrous to the economy. It was so expensive. And even the Washington Post, the liberal Washington Post, writing about Sanders and Warren, that their Medicare for All plan, those proposals don't even meet a baseline degree of factual plausibility. And even the liberal New York Times columnist Paul Krugman, he said Bernie Sanders' single-payer plan is something between a well-intentioned fool's errand and a political pipe dream. Currently, no states have a single-payer health insurance system. Bernie failed to implement his Medicare for All in the tiny and very wealthy state of Vermont, and yet he's emboldened by this abject failure. And he wishes to inflict Medicare for All upon all America. Now, the Mercatus Center issued a report finding that the Medicare for All single-payer healthcare system proposed by Bernie Sanders will cost federal taxpayers an additional $32 trillion over the next 10 years. That's another $32 trillion over 10 years, in addition to the $37 trillion in unfunded liabilities that we currently owe the Medicare system moving forward over the next 7 decades. So there's no plausible way for the American people to be able to afford Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All. And I'm listening and reading some of the comments on the various Facebook pages, and you're welcome to comment live. Call in if you'd like, 717-540-0580. on some interesting comments. Thomas Altman is reminding us that doctors back in the day that we were talking about earlier, when it was more direct pay, first-party pay between the patient and the healthcare provider for routine, regular care, and that's what we need to get back to. That gets the health insurance companies out of most of the health care that's being provided in the country. That we need to get back to where we started. And we had one of our Facebook friends reminding us about health savings accounts, which is a free market-based reform that helps us get in that direction. And I love health savings accounts. I've implemented health savings accounts in my employer-provided health insurance. And of course, Obamacare has made it increasingly more difficult. They're chipping away. They're trying to take away health savings accounts because our liberal, democratic, socialist friends do not want free market-based health care. And Thomas Altman also comments on Facebook that doctors at the time were considered very well paid. Well, that's great. I want my doctors, I want my health care providers, and certainly my dentists, I want them to be well paid. They actually do something that is of great service to me and to anybody who is sick, who is in need of medical care. They have a much higher degree of knowledge and expertise and learning and practical experience than any of us do. So they need to be paid, and paid well, for the services that they provide. You don't want to underpay your doctor. But our liberal democratic friends who want Medicare for all, what they really want is all of the healthcare providers in America to basically be government bureaucrats and work for the government. If you look at their Medicare reimbursement rates, and I used to work on this issue when I was in the Senate, they're substantially below, and we've talked about this earlier in the show, the Medicare reimbursement rates are substantially lower than what private insurers will pay, and of course what private individuals through direct pay will pay. So they're below the market rate. They're trying to grind down. The government, Medicare for all, is going to grind down healthcare providers, pay them less and less for the services that they provide to their patients, the American people. That's not the American way. That's not what America is all about. We want those in the healthcare profession who are the smartest and most capable people in the country to be well paid for the wonderful things that they do for us. That's what America is all about. But our Democratic friends are taking us in the wrong direction. And I recall talking to my liberal friends about this issue over the years, and I was always struck by often it would come down to they would express their anger at how much doctors make. They would express their anger about how well healthcare professionals, surgeons, general practitioners, oncologists, dentists, psychiatrists, how well they do. And it was almost like there was a greed or a jealousy factor. And can you sense that among Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders? They hate capitalism. They hate people who do well and provide a great service and are well compensated for that service. They hate that. That goes against their whole equality, where everyone is equal. No one can stand above based upon performance, education, experience, excellence. You can't do that in America under Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. Everyone is equal, and they want to bring our healthcare professionals, they want to bring them down, and they want to turn them into government bureaucrats who are paid by the government, and the government will always cut their rates, will always make it more difficult for them to get paid what they deserve. That's the direction of healthcare in America under the Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren plan. And yet they continue to tout that they're the savior for the U.S. healthcare system, despite the fact that Obamacare, which was their great achievement under the Obama administration, has been such a miserable failure. Health insurance is more expensive than ever. Remember when former President Barack Obama promised us, how many times did he say it on television, that he would save the average family $2,500 a year on health insurance? That was one of Obama's many lies about Obamacare. In May of 2017, the U.S. Department of Health reported the average health insurance premium has doubled since Obamacare. And last year, the cost rose by another 20% for high-cost plans and 32% for the cheapest plans, according to the study of the Liberal Urban Institute. Yet overall inflation for all other goods and services is 2%. 2% inflation for all other goods and services. Yet for health insurance plans, because of Obamacare, we have increased costs of 20 to 32% in a year. That is astronomical. That is the disaster of Obamacare. Yet we're going to get more of it under Joe Biden care, under Bernie Sanders care, and under Elizabeth Warren care. That is the future of health care in America should one of these Democratic presidential candidates actually win in the fall of 2020. And even their liberal friends in the New York Times and the Washington Post are drawing out the falsehoods of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. And how about Kamala Harris, who's been back and forth on her health care plan, and she's now for Medicare for all, yet refuses to acknowledge the cost and refuses to acknowledge that through Medicare for all, basically it abolishes private health insurance in America. And I don't think that's what the American people want. Well, that's about all the time we have today for the Mark Scaringi Show. I want to thank you for tuning in. Thank you for checking us out on Facebook. Tune in next Saturday, 1 o'clock, same time, same place.